I was only 10 years old when I committed my first murder. My name is Marie Bell. I have been behaving violently since childhood, beating up my classmates and doing vandalism. My mother was a who didn't come home often. My father is unknown to this day. The relationship with my mother was always destructive. She tried to kill me and also abused me during meetings with some of her clients. I started to myself when I was 8 years old, but my mother took the money. On May 25, 1968, when I was 10 years old, I Martin Brown, a 4-year-old boy. I committed this crime alone. With my mentally challenged friend Norma, we break into and vandalize an orphanage, leaving anonymous notes claiming responsibility for the murder of the little Martin I killed. The Newcastle police dismissed the incident as a simple prank. On July 1, 1968, we killed 3-year-old Brian O. by strangulation. We returned to the scene of the crime to carve an M for Norma, with a bar added to make an M for Mary on the corpse's abdomen with a razor blade. We used scissors to cut off strands of hair and nick her with the same scissors. As we are so young and our accounts contradict each other, what happened that day has never been fully clarified. Martin Brown's death was initially declared accidental. It was only later that his death was linked to that of Brian O. We are arrested in August 1968 and accused of murder. On December 17, 1968, Norma, considered as manipulated, was declared not guilty. I am then acquitted of murder but condemned for manslaughter with mitigated responsibility because I present classic symptoms of psychopathy. I was sentenced to life in prison. My mother talks about me several times to the press, in return for money. I get out in 1980, after spending 12 years in prison, and am granted anonymity to start a new life under a new name. My daughter was born on May 25, 1984. She knows nothing of my past until my place of residence is made public by journalists. We then had to leave the house covering ourselves with sheets so as not to be photographed. My daughter's anonymity was respected until she was 18. In 2003, I won a court case to preserve my own anonymity and that of my daughter for life.
About 15 or 10 minutes in class, somebody came in, sort of peeked their head in.
Everything was perfectly normal, nothing was going wrong until we heard a bunch of loud bangs. And the bangs we thought were from construction. There's a lot of construction going on in neighboring buildings. We honestly thought nothing of it. The teacher, however, I think knew exactly immediately what that sound was. I remember looking at her face and her face just dropping. She went to the door, opened the door to look outside to see what was going on. And immediately she shut the door, told us to get on the ground underneath our desk and somebody called 911.
There were a couple of faculty members who ran down the hallways. There was a secretary who was fired upon.
The first class they went to was across the hall. We heard the initial shots, maybe 15 to 20 of them. No more than 5 seconds later, our door opened. The gunman entered our room. The first person he shot was our professor, who was in the front of the classroom. That was just overwhelmingly just shocking, that our professor could fall that easily, that he was dead in almost an instant. The gunman was probably about 6 feet away from me. He was still at the sort of entrance of the door and had a clear shot on pretty much everybody in the class. Then he sort of swung the gun around to the side of the classroom I was on. And at that point we made eye contact, and that was probably one of the scariest moments in my life. It was slow motion in my mind, but in all it probably was less than 3 seconds that I had to react. I saw the bullet come out, and at that point I slid under my desk. I thought I was safe, but the bullet went through my arm. I sort of scrambled for the back of the room. I put as much sort of desk and objects in the way of him and me as I could. And then after that, he walked into the other side of the room. Not running, not sprinting, just calm, methodical, and then shot all of the people over there. After we had left our classroom, we heard more shots down the hallway. So all the gunshots were in a fairly close proximity to the class that we were in, and we could tell that they weren't getting very much more distant than maybe 30 or 40 feet down the hall.
There were several students who work in my laboratory who were due in, and my first thought was of their safety. I contacted one on his cell phone. I asked him then to contact some of the other students and form a phone chain system. The noises were now becoming much more urgent down the hallway because the assassin was making his way down the hall. I thought that it was time to call my wife.
It was just boom, 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 and then quiet. And then we heard them, it's again, much louder, much closer. I was the one who called 911 from the room. I don't remember why. I pulled it out and got on the phone and just got underneath the desk with the operator. And then soon after that, the Cho entered our room. I remember seeing the professor move towards the door as everyone went down to the ground. And then I turned and faced the back of the room from where I positioned, and I don't know who exactly was hit first. Boom, 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 and then it went quiet, and then you could hear the clip, and then it went quiet, and then you could hear the clips change and him dropping clips out. No, he didn't say a word. No one else said a word in my room. There were a few screams when shots were fired, but there was no yelling, there was no communication. I kind of dived out sideways, and we made it underneath the seat of one and kind of the table of another one. From the angle that he approached me, I was pretty much covered up. All my main parts with only my extremities sticking out. I completely forgot about the phone that I was on at the time with the police. I remember when I was on the phone with her describing where I was, and then as soon as Joe entered the room, I didn't say a word. Obviously, I didn't want to be talking on the phone with this man in the room. And I remember hearing the operator on the other line still talking, and me doing all that I can to cover it up and not have that heard. I heard bang, 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 and then all of a sudden I felt the very sharp feeling in my leg. And then in my hips, I felt the same kind of feeling. I thought that getting shot by a gun would have been the most excruciating pain that you could ever imagine, but I felt very, very numb. I heard bang, bang, bang again, and then a clip change, more gunshots, and then the door closed and he was out and he was gone. Or was gone down the hallway.
You can almost smell blood, like sort of that irony smell that goes along with blood. So there was a lot in our classroom. My arm was bleeding and I could see, I could feel the pain. I was able to sort of unzip my jacket and tie my belt around my arm as a tourniquet to sort of help stop the bleeding. And then with my other hand, I was able to sort of call the 911 operator and sort of inform them on the situation. I was shot in my upper right arm, through the bicep, and then Caitlin was shot in her right hand, and I think a piece of a bullet grazed her head, so she was bleeding from her hand and her head, and I was just bleeding from my arm. She had her body forced up against near where the handle was, and I had my body sort of laid across the floor, pushing up with the upper part of my body near where the hinges were. You heard the last gunshots down the hall, and all of a sudden, 10 seconds later, our door handle's turning and the doors open about 6 inches. And that was just terrifying, mentally, emotionally. You just suffered through probably one of the worst sights that you've ever seen in your life. And then to have the opportunity for that to happen again, and you be in such close range to the gunman that you probably wouldn't survive again. He was sort of forcing it with his shoulder, so he wasn't able to really fire his gun at all. Caitlin and I sort of communicated without words, and I think that helped because he wasn't really able to tell where we were through our voices. He just knew we were somewhere behind the door. I could see him through sort of that crack, narrow crack in the hinges, and see what he was doing. He had on a black leather jacket over top of sort of an ammo vest that he stored a lot of their magazines in. I knew that he was going to fire into the door. At that point, I wasn't really going to watch and see if I was going to die and watch the process that I was going to die. We backed our bodies up a lot and tried to get out of the way of the bullets coming through. And he stepped back and fired probably approximately 3 shots into the door. Fortunately, I don't think any of those bullets hit anybody. Most of the bullets were perpendicular to the door, so they either went out the windows or just hit the wall. Then we heard more gunshots down the hall, so we figured he wasn't still outside of our door.
I remember hearing a systematic boom, 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 boom. I remember hearing a systematic boom, 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 boom. He had walked almost all the way to the back of the room, close to the windows, and then looped around to the front and come down close to the door side on our side, so make kind of a U-shape. I caught one glimpse of him. I caught his boots, his pants, he was wearing a white shirt, and he had a holster over each shoulder. And I never saw his face. And that's all I wanted to see. I'm glad I didn't get to look at him. I think if I would have made eye contact with him, it would have been a more, I don't know, personal thing. I would just try to play dead and act like I wasn't there. The shots got a lot closer to where I was. I remember hearing them a lot louder. He was standing basically at my feet. Probably the scariest I've ever been in my entire life was at that moment lying on the ground. You just hear bang, 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 and then all of a sudden one of those bangs hits you. I didn't want him to know that I was there. Just play dead. Move with the force of the bullets. Just act like a rag doll, and just hopefully he'll go away. Just waiting for it to be over, just saying, just please stop, please stop. I believe it was my, limp body flailing around, which made him believe that, he got me with that one and he could move on.
After we didn't hear any gunshots for maybe 30 seconds, we heard the police finally enter our hall, and we could hear them yelling, like, come out with your hands up, things like that.
I heard police officers in the hallway. I heard them shout, and it was very confusing because in the beginning, the shout said, well, I found 2 in the bathroom. And I thought, well, perhaps there were 2 gunmen and they found the gunman. There was another voice that said, I found 2 more. They're not saying much. And at that time, a sense of dread came over me. The police officers kept shouting, I found some here, I found some there, and the sense of dread sort of increased.
I remember hearing his bullets, and then I remember hearing police outside. That's when I knew that you could hear them moving around outside, trying to get in the building somehow. I heard his footsteps. I heard him moving around. I think I remember hearing him move towards the window and looking out the window. So he could obviously hear the police coming in, trying to get into the building. As soon as the police came in the door, they opened it up. They said, shoot her down immediately. And I was like, he's dead. How did this happen? I remember being shot and then hearing 1 or 2 more shots, and then it was the silence. The thought of the event comes up just about every day. Something will spark the memory of it. Just to think about the classmates that I had at the time, and then they're not here anymore. It makes me wonder why them and not me. I believe he had all the cards in his hand. He was in complete control of the situation, and he laid the cards down, and some were face up and some were face down, and I was one of the lucky ones. It's something that's happened in my life that was negative, and I'm just trying to turn that and not have that be something that defines who I am.
it takes a tremendous act of courage to come to the aid of someone else, unprotected, uncertain of what one might find lurking around the corner. Because of the involvement of all these people, many of us are here today, and we wouldn't have been. I'm not absolutely sure that I'd be here speaking about the incident.
I survived because of quick reactions, not only of myself, but because of my classmates and the professors on our floor. I'm definitely more appreciative of life. Every day that I go on is another day that I have gone on and I survived.
And I was so heated up with anger, I just kept stabbing and stabbing and stabbing her, and I took off her head.
What you just heard was Jessica Calamari's 911 phone call after brutally murdering her mother. Hi, I'm Meg. I talk about true crime. Let's get into this sad and insane case. This all takes place in 2019 in Australia. Rita Calamari was a mother who loved her kids with her whole heart. She was said to have a heart of gold, but she really struggled with her daughter, Jessica. Jessica was developmentally delayed. She had been diagnosed with autism. She was also diagnosed with a condition called intermittent explosive rage disorder. This disorder can lead to huge outbursts of anger and what people call blind rage. Rita had other kids, but they had all moved out and she had divorced from her husband. So she lived alone with Jessica and she was her main carer. A lot of people ask me about this product. It's the 4-in-1 Glow. I use it as a primer under my foundation. It's stunning. It's linked right down here if you want to check it out. Because of Jessica's disorders, she tended to fixate on things quite intensely. Her main fixation was horror films, specifically Texas Chainsaw Massacre. She would replay the gore scenes over and over again, but not in disgust, in fascination. Another intense fixation that Jessica had was with numbers. She would put numbers together and create a random phone number and then proceed to call that number loads of times. And when eventually someone would answer the phone, she would get obsessed with that phone number and she would call it over and over and over again. She would say horrible things down the phone to these people, and when they would finally talk back or say hey, please stop calling this number, she would threaten to cut their heads off. She would also say horrible things like, I hope you die of cancer, things like that down the phone to these complete strangers. And she did this a lot. Rita was constantly trying to get help for Jessica. She tried different medications. She was even in a psychiatric home for a while, but nothing ever seemed to help. And in 2019, Jessica flat out refused to take her medication. She was around 25 when this happened, so it was hard for her mother to force her to take it. The 20th of July 2019 is where everything hit the fan. Rita had her 4-year-old grandson staying at the house with them, and Jessica did not want the attention of her mother going to anybody else. She was having outbursts towards this little boy, and she had been acting horribly the entire day. Go to part 2 because it gets absolutely insane after this. It'll be up as soon as I'm done filming. Part 2 of the girl who decapitated her own mother. So it's the 20th of July 2019. Jessica's been acting out all day. She had a screaming fit to her mother in public, and Rita she didn't know what to do, so she called a doctor to come and see Jessica, but Jessica flat out refused to see him, and there's nothing he could have done, so he just left. And so Rita was like, okay, Jessica, I'm calling an ambulance and they're gonna come get you, because she couldn't control her at this point. This further infuriated Jessica, and as Rita went to pick up the phone to call the ambulance, Jessica took the phone off of her. So Rita was like, fine, I'll go use a cell phone. And as she went to grab the cell phone, Jessica grabbed her by her hair and dragged her into the kitchen. She then grabbed a knife and began stabbing her mother. Rita tried to fight back, but she couldn't. And this was such a brutal attack that Jessica had to keep getting new knives because the knives kept breaking, and she ended up stabbing her mother over 100 times. After stabbing her so many times, she decapitated her mother. She removed her eyes, her tongue, parts of her nose, taking out all of her anger out on her mother. who was the one person who truly wanted to help her. What makes this even more heartbreaking is at some point during the attack, that 4-year-old boy walked in on her doing this to her mother, his grandmother. And this brave little guy put himself between Jessica and Rita, trying to stop it all. Like, he was 4 years old and he put himself between the two of them. Jessica then slashed his face with the knife and he ran off, locked himself in a room and hid, knowing what was happening to his grandmother. She never went after him after that, luckily, but I can't imagine the trauma that must have left him. When Jessica was done, she took her mother's head and walked outside and just dropped it outside. She then went to the neighbor's house and told them to call the police. If you're interested in this story, I do recommend listening to the phone call. It's quite long, which is why I can't put it in this video. She claims in the phone call that her mother attacked her first, but people don't think that that's what actually happened. Jessica also mentions decapitating her mother in the phone call and says, can they put her head back on? Could a doctor fix it? So clearly she wasn't doing good when she made this phone call. Jessica was charged with manslaughter instead of first-degree murder because of her mental state, and she was given 21 years in jail. From what I could research, she's still in jail. I don't understand why she's not in a mental institution or something. I feel like that's probably where she needs to be. Let me know down below your thoughts on this case. And I know I've not finished my makeup. It's because I'm going to do a transition video, so go check that out when it's finished. Comment down below what case you want next, and I'll see you in the next video.
In prison, I lived with a serial killer for 6 months before I ever knew he was a serial killer. So back in 2004, I was at Nottoway Correctional Center, and I'd gotten a job in the woodshop. So they were moving me to the woodshop workers pod. Remember, they popped the door to the cell for me to go in, and there was this little old man sitting in front of his TV drinking coffee, and I was like, bet, like, this is a roommate I can deal with. He's not young and crazy. He's not going to be loud. Like, and it worked out great. Sometimes he worked night shift and I worked day shift, so I got the cell to myself. He was quiet. You know, we had good conversations. We watched Jeopardy. I really liked the guy. He even taught me how to shave, because when I first got locked up, I couldn't grow a beard, so I never learned. And I felt so bad for him because he never got mail and never, talked on the phone, that I asked my stepmom if she would write him, because she had lived in Japan and he had been stationed in Japan. And then my stepmom comes for a visit, and she's like, Jesse, your roommate's a serial killer. And I was like, okay. So she tells me this whole story, and I go back and I have to have this conversation, like, Greg, remember how I said I was going to try to get my stepmom to write you? Well, she doesn't really feel comfortable. And he says, yeah, you did your homework. And he laughed and scared the shit out of me. Greg was my prison roommate who was connected to a dozen murders across the country, but I didn't know that at first. So finding out one day that I was living with a serial killer was uncomfortable, and it didn't really mesh with the things I knew about him. He'd been a decorated officer in Vietnam, he'd served 3 tours, and used to recite the names of every soldier he had lost. The man was helping me work on my vocabulary. We used to play Jeopardy at night. Hell, he's the one who taught me how to shave because I hadn't been able to grow a beard before prison. He was really where I started to understand that no one is just one thing.